On the evening of the 3rd of March 2021, the streets of London were enveloped in a peculiar kind of quiet. The United Kingdom was in the grip of its third national lockdown due to the global pandemic. The usual hum of the metropolis had been dampened. Restaurants were shuttered, pubs were dark, and the bustling energy of the city had receded into the warmth of private living rooms. The streets belonged to the essential workers, the police patrols, and the few individuals walking with purpose to get from one place to another. In this atmosphere of stillness, a 33-year-old marketing executive named Sarah Everard prepared to leave a friend's house in Clapham, South London. It was approximately 9 o'clock at night. Sarah was described by everyone who knew her as vibrant, intelligent, and deeply caring. She had a bright career ahead of her and a wide circle of friends who adored her. That evening, she made a decision that millions of people make every single day. She decided to walk home. The journey to her residence in Brixton Hill was roughly 2.5 miles. It was a route that should have taken her about 50 minutes at a leisurely pace. She was wearing bright clothing, distinctive trainers, and she did exactly what we are all told to do to stay safe. She stuck to well-lit main roads. She spoke to her boyfriend on the phone to let him know she was on her way. She was responsible, she was aware, and she was simply walking home. But Sarah Everard never made it to Brixton Hill. Her disappearance would not only trigger one of the most intensive manhunts in the history of the Metropolitan Police, but would also shatter the collective sense of safety for an entire nation. What unraveled over the following days was a narrative so chilling and improbable that it forced a re-examination of the trust placed in authority figures. This is not a story of a random altercation or a crime of passion. It is a forensic analysis of a calculated abuse of power, a betrayal of the public oath, and the relentless police work that utilized cutting-edge technology to bring the perpetrator to justice. This is the investigation into the murder of Sarah Everard. To understand the gravity of this case, we must first understand the environment of March 2021. The legal landscape of London was defined by the Coronavirus Act. Social gatherings were prohibited, and the police had been granted extraordinary powers to enforce these public health restrictions. Officers could stop citizens, ask why they were out, and issue fines for non-compliance. It was a time of heightened anxiety and strict adherence to rules. This context is crucial because it provided the camouflage for the crime that was about to take place. Sarah left her friend's house on Leithwaite Road around 9 p.m. She walked through the heavy wooden gates of Clapham Common, a large triangular park that serves as a green lung for South London. At 9:13 p.m., she spoke with her boyfriend, Josh, on her cell phone. They chatted about their day and made plans for the future. The conversation lasted roughly 14 minutes. At 9:27 p.m., the call ended. Sarah was captured on CCTV footage from a doorbell camera and a passing police car shortly after. She appeared calm, walking with a steady stride. She was just a woman, walking home. The alarm was not raised immediately because Sarah lived alone. It was not until the following day, March 4, when she failed to show up for a work meeting, that the threads of concern began to weave together. Sarah was a consummate professional. Missing work without notice was completely out of character. Her boyfriend, realizing she hadn't texted him to say she had arrived home safe the night before, contacted the police. The missing persons report was filed, and the machinery of the Metropolitan Police Service began to turn. Initial investigations into missing persons cases often start with the inner circle, family, friends, and partners. This is standard procedure to rule out voluntary disappearance or personal disputes. Sarah's inner circle was quickly cleared. Her life was stable. Her relationships were healthy, and she had no history of mental health crises that would suggest she had simply walked away from her life. The investigation was immediately escalated. The police understood that if a woman like Sarah vanished from a busy London street, something untoward had likely happened. Detectives began the painstaking process of canvassing. In the modern era, this does not just mean knocking on doors. It means harvesting digital data. Teams of officers began scouring the route Sarah would have taken, requesting footage from private doorbell cameras, commercial security systems, and municipal CCTV. Simultaneously, another team began analyzing cell site data. Mobile phones are constantly shaking hands with cell towers, leaving a digital breadcrumb trail of a user's location. Sarah's phone had been active, pinging towers along her route. Until suddenly, abruptly, it went silent. The breakthrough in the case did not come from a witness statement or a confession, but from a piece of technology that is ubiquitous in London: a bus camera. London buses are equipped with high-definition cameras that record the streets as they travel. Investigators realized that a bus had passed along the South Circular Road at the precise time Sarah's phone signal vanished. When analysts reviewed the footage from the bus, they saw something that changed the entire complexion of the investigation. The footage, grainy but decipherable, showed Sarah standing on the pavement next to a white car. The car's hazard lights were flashing. Standing in front of her was a man. To the casual observer, and indeed to Sarah herself, this looked like a standard police stop. The hazard lights, the posture of the man, the interaction it mimicked, the tens of thousands of legitimate interactions police were having with the public regarding COVID regulations. The car was a white Vauxhall Astra. It was not a marked police vehicle. But in the world of undercover operations and plainclothes policing, unmarked cars are common. However, the behavior of the vehicle after the interaction raised red flags. It didn't stay. It didn't release her. Sarah was seen entering the vehicle, and the car drove away. This visual evidence pivoted the investigation from a missing person search to an abduction inquiry. The license plate of the white Vauxhall Astra was captured by an automatic number plate recognition camera, known as ANPR. This system tracks vehicles moving across the UK road network. The plate was traced not to a private owner, but to a car rental agency in Dover, a town on the coast of Kent, miles away from London. Detectives contacted the rental agency immediately. The records showed that the vehicle had been hired by a man named Wayne Couzens. When the police ran the name Wayne Couzens through their databases, the result was a shock that reverberated through the command chain. Wayne Couzens was not a known criminal. He was not a gang member. He was a serving police officer with the Metropolitan Police Service. He was a member of the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, an elite unit responsible for guarding the most sensitive sites in the UK, including the American Embassy and the Houses of Parliament. The implication was horrifying. The man seen stopping Sarah was a verified police officer. This fact transformed the investigation into one of the most sensitive and high-pressure operations the force had ever undertaken. They were hunting one of their own. On the evening of March 9, 6 days after Sarah disappeared, police teams descended on Couzens' home in Deal, Kent. The arrest was swift. When officers arrived, Couzens was at home with his family. He did not surrender immediately with a confession. Instead, he engaged in a bizarre and frantic attempt to wipe his phone, resetting it to factory settings just minutes before officers breached the door. This act of destroying evidence would later be cited as a clear indication of his guilt and his forensic awareness. During his initial police interviews, Couzens presented a story that was as elaborate as it was implausible. He claimed that he was in financial trouble with an Eastern European gang. He told detectives that the gang had demanded he deliver them a girl as payment for his debts. He admitted to kidnapping Sarah, but claimed he had handed her over to this mysterious gang alive and unharmed. He portrayed himself as a victim of circumstance, a man forced into a corner. However, the detectives were not listening to his stories. They were following the evidence. And the forensic trail Couzens had left behind was undeniable. While Couzens was spinning his fabrication in the interrogation room, forensic teams were dismantling the timeline of his movements. They tracked the rental car's GPS data. It showed that after abducting Sarah in London, the car had traveled directly to Kent. Specifically, it had gone to a remote area of woodland near Ashford. Cell site analysis corroborated the car's movements. But even more damning was the discovery of Couzens' personal activities in the days leading up to the murder. Financial records showed that he had purchased a roll of self-adhesive film, a large builder's bag, and incredibly, he had purchased handcuffs from an online retailer. These were not police-issue handcuffs. They were bought privately. This detail was critical. It suggested premeditation. It suggested that he had been planning to restrain someone. The search teams in Kent focused their efforts on the woodland area identified by the car's GPS. It was a grim and difficult task, searching through dense undergrowth in cold March weather. On March 10, human remains were discovered inside a large builder's bag, hidden deep within the woods. Dental records confirmed the tragic truth. It was Sarah Everard. The post-mortem examination was conducted with the utmost care. The findings were clinical and devastating. Sarah had died from compression of the neck. The evidence suggested that she had been restrained. The narrative of the gang disintegrated completely. There was no gang. There was only Wayne Couzens. Faced with the overwhelming mountain of forensic evidence, the DNA in the rental car, the GPS data, the purchase of the disposal items, and the discovery of the body, Couzens' defense crumbled. He eventually pleaded guilty to kidnapping, rape, and murder. But the question remained: how did he get her into the car? This is where the case moves from a standard homicide investigation to a terrifying study of the abuse of authority. During the sentencing hearings, the full picture of that night was reconstructed. Couzens had finished a shift earlier that day. He was off duty. He was wearing civilian clothes. However, he had his police warrant card, his official identification, and the handcuffs he had purchased. He drove the rental car to London and prowled the streets, looking for a victim. When he saw Sarah, he utilized the context of the lockdown to his advantage. He pulled over, activated the hazard lights, and approached her. He showed her his warrant card. It is believed he told her she was in breach of COVID regulations. Sarah, being a law-abiding citizen, would have respected the authority of a police officer. Witnesses who saw the interaction described them as looking like a standard police stop. He handcuffed her, an act she likely submitted to because she believed she was being lawfully detained, and placed her in the back of his car. This was a false arrest. It was a kidnapping, plain and simple. But it was cloaked in the legitimacy of the law. Sarah did not get into that car because she was naive. She got into that car because she was conditioned to trust the police. The sentencing of Wayne Couzens was a historic legal moment in the United Kingdom. The judge, Lord Justice Fulford, had to determine the appropriate punishment. In the UK, the death penalty does not exist. The most severe punishment available is a whole life order, which means the prisoner will never be released. They will die in prison. These orders are rare, usually reserved for serial killers or terrorists. However, Lord Justice Fulford determined that this case was exceptional. He argued that the murder of Sarah Everard was not just a crime against an individual, but a crime against the very concept of democratic policing. By using his warrant card and his position to deceive and abduct a citizen, Couzens had attacked the fundamental trust that allows society to function. The judge noted that the terror Sarah must have felt as the journey progressed, and she realized this was not a lawful arrest, was a significant, aggravating factor. In September 2021, Wayne Couzens was sentenced to a whole life order. He became the first police officer in British history to receive this sentence for a single murder. The judge's words rang out clearly. The misuse of a police officer's role to kidnap, rape, and murder a lone victim was of equal seriousness to a murder carried out for the purpose of advancing a political, religious, or ideological cause. The conclusion of the legal case brought a form of justice, but it did not bring closure to the societal wounds the crime had opened. The murder of Sarah Everard sparked a massive public outcry regarding the safety of women. A movement known as Reclaim These Streets organized vigils across the country. The image of the bandstand on Clapham Common, piled high with flowers, became a symbol of collective grief and anger. The conversation shifted to the burden of safety. For decades, women have been taught to modify their behavior to stay safe. Don't walk alone. Wear bright clothes. Stick to lit streets. Hold your keys in your hand. Sarah Everard did all of those things. She did everything right. And it did not save her. This realization forced a change in the dialogue, shifting the focus from what women should do to stay safe to what men must do to stop being violent. The Metropolitan Police faced an internal crisis of confidence. The revelation that Couzens had been known to have a questionable reputation among colleagues. He was reportedly nicknamed the rapist at a previous station due to making women uncomfortable, though no criminal charges were ever brought, led to inquiries about vetting procedures. How did a man with such proclivities slip through the net? How was he entrusted with a firearm and a warrant card? Independent inquiries were launched to examine the culture within the police force, looking for signs of misogyny and failures in the disciplinary process. The case highlighted the phenomenon of red flags being ignored or minimized in professional environments. It prompted a purge of officers with histories of sexual misconduct or domestic violence allegations that had previously been overlooked. Forensically, the case was a triumph. It demonstrated the power of the digital dragnet. The integration of ANPR, private CCTV, cell site triangulation, and financial data created an unshakable timeline that cut through the suspect's lies. It showed that in the modern world, it is almost impossible to move through a city like London without leaving a trace. The bus camera footage, in particular, stands as a testament to the importance of ubiquitous surveillance in solving major crimes, even as it raises questions about privacy. But beyond the forensics and the politics, the heart of this story remains the loss of a human life. Sarah Everard was not just a symbol or a catalyst for reform. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. She was a young woman with a future that was stolen. The legacy of this case is complex. It serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of individuals when faced with the abuse of state power. It is a case study in excellent detective work, where the investigators refused to be blinded by the suspect's badge. They treated a police officer like any other suspect, following the evidence wherever it led, even when it led to their own ranks. As we reflect on the murder of Sarah Everard, we are left with uncomfortable questions about the nature of trust. We teach our children to look for a police officer when they are in trouble. We assume that a badge and a uniform signify safety. Wayne Couzens weaponized that trust. The investigation proved that no one is above the law. The swift identification, arrest, and sentencing of Couzens showed that the justice system can work, even when the criminal is part of the system itself. But the damage done to the relationship between the police and the public, particularly women, will take years, perhaps decades, to heal. The story of Sarah Everard is a tragedy of the highest order. It is a story that reminds us that the monsters we fear are not always lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they are hiding in plain sight, wearing the very uniforms designed to protect us. It compels us to demand higher standards from those in power, and to look out for one another in a world that can change from mundane to malevolent in the blink of an eye. As you walk down your own streets tonight, perhaps taking a moment to appreciate the quiet or the bustle of your city, consider the systems of trust that govern your life. Justice was served for Sarah Everard. But the question remains, how do we ensure that the guardians of our society are worthy of the power we give them?